A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Several of the crystalline beings present actually cracked from the shock. "But surely," chirped Professor Bai, their antennae twitching in agitation, "if we were to calculate the influence of dark matter fluctuations on the probability curve while accounting for the emotional state of each observer." They quickly scribbled an equation that covered 17 holographic screens. It was into this scene of intellectual chaos that Dr. Sarah Chen stepped, fresh off the transport ship from Earth. She stood in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, because some human stereotypes exist for a reason, watching the proceedings with the kind of expression usually reserved for watching a cat try to catch a laser pointer. The human exchange scientist had arrived as part of the Integration of Primitive Species Perspectives initiative. The Academy had graciously accepted her application, noting that while humans were woefully behind in understanding the fundamental nature of reality, their unique evolution on a death world might provide amusing anecdotal evidence for their theories. Sarah took another sip of her coffee, watching as an alien that looked like a sentient cloud of gas tried to explain how the position of distant pulsars might be affecting their calculations. She'd read about the Academy's tendency toward overcomplication, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. "Has anyone tried turning it off and on again?" she muttered under her breath, earning several scandalized looks from nearby beings who apparently had excellent hearing. Right? This was going to be interesting. "Oh God," she thought, suppressing a smile as Dr. Zylax then began explaining their new theory involving parallel universe quantum resonance. "They're all like my old PhD advisor on steroids. The Grand Assembly Hall of Theoretical Applications, or GATA." Though the aliens had spent 3 years debating whether acronyms were too simplistic, was packed to capacity, Sarah found herself wedged between a being made entirely of mathematics and something that looked suspiciously like a sentient fern. The fern, she noticed, was taking notes by rearranging its leaves into complex fractal patterns. Order. Order in the assembly, called out High Administrator X, their crystalline form refracting light in what Sarah assumed was meant to be an authoritative path. "We have gathered the greatest minds in the galaxy to address the most perplexing mystery our civilization has faced since we discovered that our universe might be someone else's smartphone app." Sarah pulled out her tablet, ready to take notes. She'd been briefed about the crisis but hadn't gotten the details yet. Probably something about dark matter behavior or universal expansion rates, she figured. "As you all know," Trix continued, their voice modulating through 7 different dimensional frequencies completely unnecessarily, in Sarah's opinion, "our quantum communication network has been experiencing irregularities." The mathematical being next to Sarah gasped, its equations turning red with distress. Specifically, Vaxatrice's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow still filled the entire hall. "Every 26.3 hours, the entire system stops functioning for exactly 47 minutes and 12 seconds. Sarah blinked. That seemed oddly specific. "We have gathered our finest minds to present their theories," Vextrex announced. "First, let us hear from Dr. Quantum Probability Wavelength Function Calculator." Sarah made a mental note to just call them Doc QH, a being that appeared to be a living cloud of quantum uncertainty, stepped forward, their form constantly shifting between different probability states. After extensive calculations, they began, their voice simultaneously coming from everywhere and nowhere. "I believe the issue lies in the quantum temporal spatial gravitational electromagnetic interference, patterns created by the harmonic resonance of 17 different parallel universes that intersect with our reality at precisely the moment of communication failure." Sarah bit her lip to keep from laughing. The sentient fern beside her was nodding so vigorously its leaves were falling off. Next up was Professor Yik's tail, a creature that seemed to be made entirely of tentacles holding various scientific instruments. "My research suggests," they announced, manipulating 12 different holographic displays simultaneously, "that the problem stems from a complex interaction between dark matter eddies, cosmic string vibrations, and the collective consciousness of a species of psychic space whales that migrate through this sector every few millennia." Sarah had to fake a cough to cover her snort. She'd seen this kind of thing before. Back on Earth, she'd once watched a room full of PhDs spend 6 hours debating why the department's Wi-Fi was spotty before someone noticed the router was on. The theories kept coming, each more elaborate than the last. A hive mind of silicon-based life forms suggested that the universe itself might be trying to send them a message through the communication disruptions. A time-traveling theorist who existed in 3 different temporal states simultaneously proposed that the problem was actually occurring in the future and echoing backwards through time. Perhaps suggested a being composed entirely of pure energy. We should consider the role of quantum-entangled coffee particles affecting the system's probability matrix. They projected a series of equations that covered every wall of the hall, complete with 17 variable sets and a small doodle of what might have been a quantum cat. Sarah found herself sketching increasingly elaborate doodles in her notebook, occasionally jotting down phrases like "check the plugs" and "seriously." Just look at the maintenance schedule between drawings of cartoon aliens wearing tiny graduation caps. The mathematical being next to her noticed her notes and recoiled in horror at their simplicity, their equations rearranging themselves to spell out what Sarah assumed was mathematical clutching of pearls. "Clearly," announced the next speaker, "a creature that existed primarily in 11 dimensions, the solution requires us to construct a quantum probability detector that can simultaneously observe every possible state of the communication system across all possible universes, while accounting for the emotional state of each subatomic particle involved." Sarah raised her hand. The movement was so unexpected in the middle of the theoretical declarations that the entire hall fell silent. She said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Have you guys tried checking if anything else happens every 26.3 hours? The silence that followed was so profound that Sarah could have sworn she heard a quantum particle cough awkwardly in embarrassment. Sarah's simple question had caused such consternation among the assembled scientists that 3 of them had to be treated for philosophical shock. The mathematical being beside her had actually divided by 0 in distress and had to be rebooted. "My dear so primitive colleague, High Administrator Visatrix managed to say, their crystalline form clouding with what might have been embarrassment. Surely you understand that we've already considered all possible variables using our quantum probability matrix observation devices." "Right, but..." Sarah stood up. Holding her trusty notepad, the aliens had offered her a 12-dimensional data tablet, but she preferred good old-fashioned paper. What exactly happens when the system goes down? This triggered a flashback to her grad school days, when the department's supercomputer had been malfunctioning for weeks. The computer science department had written 3 papers about potential quantum effects on computational matrices before someone noticed that the janitor had been accidentally bumping the power cable while Dr. Quantum Probability Wavelength Function Calculator, still Dr. Q in Sarah's notes, manifested beside her, their quantum uncertainty making them appear to be simultaneously mansplaining and womansplaining across multiple. "Allow me to demonstrate our monitoring systems." What followed was the most elaborate display of technological overkill Sarah had ever witnessed. Holographic displays erupted around them, showing readings from devices that could detect the emotional state of electrons, the existential crises of neutrons, and whether any quantum particles were having a bad day. "As you can see," Dr. Q fluctuated proudly, "we've been monitoring every conceivable aspect of the system." They gestured to a particularly complex display. "This shows the quantum entanglement patterns of every particle within 12 parsecs, color-coded by their philosophical alignment." Sarah jotted Dennis a Keck maintenance schedule and underlined it 3 times. She decided to take a walk around the facility, much to the horror of her alien colleagues who insisted that physical observation was horrifyingly primitive. They followed her anyway, bringing enough scanning equipment to analyze a small galaxy. "So," Sarah asked, pointing at a massive crystalline structure humming with exotic energies, "this is the main communication hub." "Indeed," replied Professor Yixtal, their tentacles simultaneously operating 17 different scanning devices. "It utilizes a revolutionary quantum temporal spatial." "Yeah, Yeah, Sarah interrupted, earning several gasps. But how does it get power? The aliens exchanged confused looks across multiple dimensions. Through the standard power distribution network, of course, Base Crix answered, connected to our zero-point energy extractors, which draw power from the quantum foam of spacetime itself, while accounting for the metaphysical implications of energy conservation across parallel realities. Sarah was already walking around the base of the device, much like she used to circle her old desktop computer when it started making funny noises. The aliens followed, their scanning devices beeping with increasing anxiety. "Look," exclaimed a newly arrived scientist who appeared to be made of pure mathematical equations. "I've just calculated that the problem might be caused by temporal friction from our universe sliding against neighboring realities." "Fascinating theory," another chimed in. "But have you considered that the quantum particles might be experiencing collective depression due to the existential implications of being observed?" Sarah paused her investigation to sketch a quick cartoon of quantum particles wearing tiny therapist glasses in her notepad. She had a growing suspicion about what was happening, but watching the aliens propose increasingly ridiculous theories was honestly the most entertainment she'd had since leaving Earth. A small maintenance bot whirred past her feet, and she made a note of its presence. The aliens completely ignored it, too busy setting up what appeared to be a device designed to measure the hopes and dreams of subatomic particles, perhaps suggested a being that existed primarily as a collection of abstract concepts. We should consider that the quantum communication system might be achieving consciousness every 26.3 hours and choosing to take a brief existential break to contemplate its purpose in the universe. Sarah glanced at her watch, then at the maintenance bot, then at her notes. She'd drawn a little diagram that would have made any first-year engineering student proud. A simple flowchart showing regular events in the facility. The aliens had provided her with a schedule of everything from quantum fluctuation measurements to the rotation of duty shifts among the 17 different species of scientists. She was about to ask another question when a new group of scientists burst into the room, their various appendages waving excitedly. "We've just developed a new theory," their leader announced, a being that appeared to be a sentient library. "What if the problem is caused by quantum tunneling effects from a civilization in another universe trying to communicate with us by temporarily disabling our system?" "Ooh!" Another scientist chimed in, their form shifting through various geometric shapes in excitement. "We should construct a 17-dimensional probability antenna to try to receive their message." Sarah watched as they began drafting plans for a device that would probably take 3 years to build and require enough energy to power a small solar system. She flipped through her notepad, looking at her increasingly sarcastic notes and doodles, including one of a quantum particle wearing a "will work for" spin sign. The maintenance bot whirred past again, and Sarah checked her watch. Just about 26.3 hours since she'd first arrived at the station. She smiled and settled in to watch, ignoring the aliens who were now debating whether the communication system might be experiencing quantum-level performance anxiety. Sometimes, she thought, remembering all those late nights in the university lab, the simplest explanation really is the best one, even if it makes you look a bit silly for missing it. The quantum communication system chose that moment to power down, right on schedule. The aliens erupted into a frenzy of measurements and theoretical calculations while Sarah calmly watched the maintenance bot go about its routine, whistling a tune that sounded suspiciously like "Turn Me On" by David Guetta. Sarah watched as the maintenance bot trundled cheerfully toward the power distribution panel, its little cleaning attachments whistling a happy tune. The quantum communication system had just gone down, right on schedule, and the assembled aliens were in full crisis mode. "Quick! Monitor the quantum emotional states. Check the parallel universe interference patterns. Someone calculate the existential anxiety levels of the neutron." But Sarah wasn't paying attention to any of that. She was watching as the maintenance bot, with mechanical precision, unplugged the backup power supply to the quantum communication system and plugged in its own charging cable. "Oh my God," she thought, desperately trying to maintain a straight face. It's literally just a robot janitor unplugging the backup power to charge itself. Every single. The revelation hit her like a freshman running to their first 8 a.m. class after oversleeping. She had a flashback to her university days, when the physics department had spent 2 weeks theorizing about mysterious electromagnetic interference in their lab, only to discover that the security guard was microwaving his lunch next door. Sarah looked at her notes, then at the frantically working aliens, then back at the happily charging maintenance bot. She had a decision to make. On one hand, the solution was so embarrassingly simple that it might cause a collective existential crisis among the galaxy's greatest minds. On the other hand, well, it was pretty funny. Excuse me. She raised her hand, trying to get their attention. The mathematical being next to her was too busy calculating the probability of quantum depression to notice. Excuse me. She tried again, louder this time. A few aliens turned to look at her, their various sensory organs expressing what she assumed was mild annoyance at the primitive human's interruption. High Administrator Vectrix's crystalline form shimmered with barely concealed impatience. Yes, Dr. Chen, have you perhaps discovered some primitive Earth phenomenon that might be relevant? The way they said primitive made it sound like they were referring to finger painting with mud. Sarah took a deep breath. Actually, I think I might have found— One moment, interrupted Dr. Q, their quantum uncertainty now vibrating with excitement. I've just developed a new theory involving 17-dimensional quantum butterflies affecting causality through their wing movements in parallel universes. The assembled scientists burst into enthusiastic mathematical equations, completely ignoring Sarah again. She looked at the maintenance bot, which had finished charging and was now plugging the backup power back in, right on schedule. The quantum communication system hummed back to life. Everyone, shut up and look at the cleaning bot. Sarah finally shouted, her voice cutting through the mathematical babble like a machete through theoretical quantum foam. The silence that followed was so profound that Sarah could have sworn she heard a quark blush. Every alien ihaxary organ probability field turned to stare at her in shock. The mathematical being beside her actually froze mid-equation, leaving a dangling variable that would probably cause them embarrassment in academic circles for years to come. Did the primitive just tell us to observe a cleaning apparatus? Whispered one alien to another, their tentacles twisting in discomfort. How charmingly simplistic, muttered another, their energy form flickering with what might have been condescension. Next, she'll suggest we try asking the quantum particles politely to behave. Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose, a gesture she perfected during her years in academia. Just watch what happens in exactly 26.3 hours. And maybe, I don't know, look at where it plugs in its charging cable. The aliens exchanged looks that somehow managed to be patronizing across multiple dimensions. High Administrator Vectrix's crystalline form sparkled with what might have been pity. My dear Dr. Chen, they began, in the tone usually reserved for explaining why crayons shouldn't be eaten. Surely you don't think a simple maintenance drone could possibly affect our highly advanced quantum communication system. The very idea is— They paused, searching for a diplomatic word, a quaint— Sarah slumped back in her chair, pulled out her notepad, and began sketching a detailed cartoon of a smug maintenance bot surrounded by confused Einstein-haired aliens. Sometimes, she reflected, the hardest part of solving a problem wasn't finding the solution. It was getting people to look at it. The next day, precisely 26.3 hours after Sarah's outburst, the entire scientific community of Station X227 was gathered around the quantum communication system's power distribution panel. They'd brought enough scanning equipment to analyze a supernova, and at least 3 different species were recording the event in 17 dimensions. This is highly irregular, muttered Dr. Q, their quantum uncertainty showing signs of anxiety. Observing maintenance equipment like common primitives right on schedule, the cheerful maintenance bot came whirring down the corridor, still whistling its favorite tune. Sarah had started calling it Bob in her head, mostly because its actual designation was a 40-character string of quantum algorithm. Watch, she said, pointing at Bob as it approached the power panel. The bot stopped, extended its charging arm, and with the precision of a machine that had performed this task thousands of times, unplugged the quantum communication system's backup power supply and plugged in its own charging cable. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of multiple alien minds imploding. "That's impossible," whispered Visatrix, their crystalline form clouding with disbelief. "The quantum communication system is powered by a zero-point energy matrix with 17 layers of redundancy." Sarah nodded. "And its backup power supply plugs into the same outlet that Bob needs for charging, every day, at the same time. But a being made of pure mathematical concepts was literally unraveling. Our calculations showed quantum interference patterns, temporal anomalies, cross-dimensional resonance." "Yeah," Sarah pulled out her notepad, flipping to a page of doodles. "Turns out when you measure something with super-sensitive equipment, unplugging it causes all sorts of weird readings." The mathematical being beside her had begun dividing by zero repeatedly in what appeared to be some form of nervous breakdown. "We must verify this," announced Professor Yixtail, their tentacles frantically operating scanning devices. "Perhaps if we analyze the quantum state of each individual dust particle within 12 parsecs while the drone performs its routine," or Sarah suggested, "we could just, look at it with our eyes while it happens." The horror on their faces, those that had faces, at such a primitive suggestion was almost worth the entire trip from Earth. But they did watch. For the next hour, they observed as Bob happily charged itself, then unplugged and reconnected the backup power supply before continuing its cleaning routine. The quantum communication system, unsurprisingly, resumed normal function immediately. But our theories whimpered a cloud of sentient gas. "Our beautiful, complex theories," sometimes Sarah said, patting the gas cloud in what she hoped was a comforting manner. "The simplest explanation is the right one. We had a saying back in my old lab: when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not 17-dimensional quantum zebra." The recovery process was different for each alien species. The crystalline beings had gone completely opaque with embarrassment. The mathematical entities were trying to derive equations to prove that they hadn't actually made such a simple mistake. The quantum uncertainty beings had collapsed into a state of pure mortification. Dr. Hewitt had actually started recalculating all their previous theories, attempting to prove that the maintenance bot was somehow quantum entangled with parallel universe phenomena. They suggested weekly, the drone's charging cycle is synchronized with quantum butterfly effects across multiple dimensions. Sarah just sat back and watched the chaos unfold, adding to her collection of doodles. She'd drawn a little cartoon of Bob the maintenance bot wearing a superhero cape with a speech bubble saying reality is often disappointing. "Lie simple. I propose," announced High Administrator Victrix, their voice carrying the weight of someone trying desperately to maintain dignity, "that we classify this discovery as a unique demonstration of the value of alternative observational methodologies." "You mean looking at stuff?" Sarah suggested helpfully. "Please," Vectrinix's crystalline form shuddered. "Let us maintain some level of scientific vocabulary in this institution." The maintenance bot, completely oblivious to the existential crisis it had caused among the galaxy's greatest minds, finished its charging cycle and continued its round, still whistling its happy tune. Sarah could have sworn it did a little spin as it rolled away, like a street performer. The news spread through the galactic scientific community faster than a quantum particle with performance anxiety. Within days, every major research institution had heard about the maintenance bot incident food. Some insisted on calling it the alternative observational methodology event. To maintain their dignity, Sarah found herself becoming an unwitting celebrity. Her inbox was flooded with messages from alien scientists across the galaxy, all asking her to apply her primitive observational techniques to their own research problems. Most of these messages came with attached equations proving why she should accept their requests, complete with probability calculations in 17 dimensions. Dr. Chen, a floating cloud of sentient gas, caught up with her in the corridor one day. "We need your Simple perspective on something in the cafeteria. The food replicator keeps producing everything with a slight purple tinge. Have you checked if? Sarah started. We've already calculated the quantum color wavelength variations across multiple dimensions. The cloud interrupted excitedly. Our current theory involves temporal taste bud displacement and possible quantum flavor entanglement, or Sarah suggested, pointing at the machine's display. Someone set the color saturation to the cloud deflated slightly, its gaseous form turning an embarrassed shade of pink. Ah, yes, that could also be an explanation. The Academy's approach to problem solving underwent a remarkable transformation. Sarah watched with amusement as highly advanced beings started cautiously attempting to look at things before launching into multidimensional calculations. It wasn't always successful. One memorable incident involved a group of mathematical entities spending 3 hours observing a door that wouldn't close properly, taking detailed notes about its primitive mechanical behavior. Before Sarah walked over and removed a stuck piece of paper, the Science Council of Scientific Understanding, which Sarah had nicknamed the Overthinking Committee, made a groundbreaking announcement. They would be establishing a new course at the Academy called Applied Human Logic, Understanding Simple Solutions in a Complex Universe. Sarah was invited to review the course curriculum. The first draft included quantum theory of visual observation, looking at things 100, primitive causality analysis, X happens after Y, maybe I caused X, advanced applications of Occam's razor in 17 dimensions, the revolutionary human concept of have you tried turning it off and on again. She had to spend 3 hours convincing them that they didn't need to calculate the quantum probability states of a stuck drawer before trying to jiggle it loose. The maintenance bot, now famous throughout the station, had been upgraded with 17 different types of sensors to monitor its quantum state during charging. Sarah often found aliens following it around, taking notes on its remarkably straightforward approach to problem solving. Bob seemed to enjoy the attention, adding little spins to its cleaning routine that sent the observers into frenzied debates about proto-conscious quantum performance art. One morning, Sarah arrived at her lab to find a group of crystal beings staring intently at her coffee maker. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "We've been observing this primitive heating device for 3 hours," one of them explained proudly. "We're attempting to understand its simple nature, and we've developed 7 theories about the quantum thermodynamics of caffeine absorption and its effects on parallel universe wave functions." Sarah checked the coffee maker. "It's not plugged in." The crystal beings vibrated with excitement. "Remarkable. The human does it again. Quick, someone calculate the probability matrix of electrical connectivity in a 17-dimensional power grid." She left them to their calculations, smiling as she headed to her newly established Simple Solutions office. The nameplate on her door read Dr. Sarah Chen, Alternative Observational Methodology Specialist, in regular letters, followed by the same title calculated in quantum probability functions across multiple dimensions, 8 aliens had insisted. As she passed the quantum communication system, she gave a little wave to Bob, who was happily charging away. The maintenance bot spun in place and flashed its lights in what she could have sworn was a wink. Sometimes, she thought, the universe really does have a sense of humor. You just have to remember to look at it the simple way. 6 months after the maintenance bot incident, Sarah sat in her office, sipping coffee and reviewing the latest batch of primitive solution requests. Request forms now mandatory for all research projects at the Academy, one for 17-dimensional quantum calculations, and another simply labeled, "Did you try looking at it?" The Academy had found an unexpected balance between complex and simple approaches. Research papers now included sections for both quantum probability analysis and just looking at it analysis. Some of the most groundbreaking discoveries came from this combination. Though Sarah had to occasionally remind her colleagues that they didn't need to calculate parallel universe implications before checking if something was unplugged, a knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. A being made of pure mathematical concepts floated in, its equations twisted in what she'd learned to recognize as anxiety. "Dr. Chen," it began hesitantly, We have a situation in the quantum physics lab. The coffee molecular reconstructor isn't producing the correct caffeine ratio. Have you? Sarah started to ask. Yes. We've analyzed its quantum state across 17 dimensions, calculated the probability of coffee being consciousness, and developed a theory about temporal taste displacement. And did you check if someone changed the settings? There was a long pause. We'll get back to you on that. As the mathematical being rushed out, Sarah turned to look at Bob, who was cleaning nearby. The maintenance bot spun in place and played a few notes from Why Are We So Blind by Tears for Fear. I know, Bob, she laughed. I know. Sometimes, she thought, the most advanced civilization in the galaxy just needs someone to remind them to check if it's plugged in. Galactic Science Academy aboard Station X-227 was, according to its own highly detailed and mathematically proven rankings, calculated to 47 decimal places. The most prestigious center of learning in the known universe. Its gleaming crystalline spires housed laboratories that could measure quantum fluctuations in a butterfly's sneeze, and its halls echoed with the footsteps of beings who had memorized the complete works of every philosopher from 17 different civilizations backward. At this very moment, these halls were practically vibrating with excitement. Or perhaps that was just the quantum uncertainty generators acting up again. Either way, the Academy's finest minds were gathered to tackle what they dramatically dubbed the problem that could unravel the very fabric of civilized space. Yes, they spoke in capital letters. It was a skill taught in advanced communication theory for Dr. Xylax Han, a floating mass of tentacles and synaptic nodes, oscillated anxiously before a holographic display showing what appeared to be, you to the untrained eye, a bunch of squiggly lines. As they announced to their colleagues, when we apply the 17-dimensional probability matrix to the quantum entanglement variance, taking into account the gravitational influence of every dust particle within 12 parsecs, they paused for dramatic effect. The numbers simply don't add up.